Morning. Afternoon. One of those. It's been a really long week, folks. So yeah, as Brett said, I'm CTO at Moon these days. I also help run the Lead Dev Conference. If you've got any engineers who you work with who could do with a bit more leadership and management skills, send them along, we'll fix them for you. And I started off as I actually started off as a hardware hacker. So I did lots of hardware stuff when I was a kid. My weird claim to fame is I built part of South Africa's first satellite when I was a kid. Who of you have got kids? Parents in the audience? I'm not a parent yet, but I have very critical advice for you. Don't let them do anything cool when they're young. I sold that something went into space when I was 16, and it's all been fucking downhill since then. So, yeah. But yeah, I started out as a dev, and then I ended up as a project manager just because I worked for Procter Gamble, this huge consumer goods company, and they outsourced everything, so I didn't get to write any code anymore, and I had to learn some new skills, and that's when I ended up writing the book and various other things. But these days, I mostly lead really big technology teams, and I suppose this is kind of the story of how that was really terrifying and what I learned along the way. So my initial reaction when I got asked to become a people manager when I was early in my career was effectively this. Because I think a lot of engineers have really terrible experiences of being managed, particularly when I'd been like the experiment as an intern for people they were trying to see whether they could develop management skills, and they certainly found with 3 of them that they couldn't in my first 18 months being managed. And so I was pretty petrified, because I think we all hate bad bosses. The Dilbert pointy head boss is a stereotype, but a pretty familiar one, and we describe them as clueless or as empty suits or pointless. I'm sure you're all familiar with the seagull style of management: fly in, shout at everybody, shit on everything, fly away again. See, at engineering conferences, they all go, ooh, before they laugh. So they're a little more worried about that. And so my reaction was to go, this is the best cat gif on the internet. After extensive research, I have found this. I know Sam Barnes was talking here today as well, so I know his GIF game is always exceptional, but I have searched for years, and I found the Holy Grail. And so my reaction was basically to refuse to do this management thing unless I could be reasonable at it. I didn't set out trying to be good at it, I just wanted to be not terrible. And I went looking for advice. And so I love this quote from Katerina about how, there's 3 types of managers. The bullshit umbrella protects the team. The bullshit funnel finds the one they hate the most and directs everything onto them. The bullshit fan just kind of spreads everything indiscriminately. And again, the laughs of recognition are always very telling in an audience. And then I went looking for okay, well, I've got a lot of what not to do. What should I do? And the most freeing thing I found is that actually a lot of traditional things people believe about management are just outright crap. There's no science to support it. There's plenty of evidence that it doesn't work. And in particular, when people try to be super directive, we've got plenty of research to show that just doesn't work at all. And so being both a geek and frankly a nerd, I went looking for research, for science, because science always saves me. That's kind of the summary of my life, is I always find refuge in science. And so I have a favorite management book, and you can now all refuse to speak to me in public as a result. But it's this. It's First Break All the Rules. And the reason I love it is it's hugely data-based. Gallup went looking for what makes teams high-performing. Didn't go looking for what made people happy. Went looking for what makes this restaurant so much better than all the others in the chain. What makes this division so much more profitable than other divisions in the company? Why has this factory got such a better safety record than the others? And they came up with these 12 questions that predicted high performance. And I know my reaction to being given 12 things to memorize is, yay, now I'm drowning. So rather than trying to remember all of them at once, let's zoom out a little bit from it. Who's read Drive? Okay, a few of you. There's a 12-minute long video, which is a SketchNote video of it, which if you're busy and don't have time to read books, I'll tweet out afterwards as a resource. Dan Pink did a great review a few years ago of the modern understanding of kind of psychology of motivation. What makes people get up in the morning and want to go to work and do things. And basically found it's about these three things: purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So motivation is the sum of how much you believe in why. Like what are you trying to achieve? Do you understand why you're doing what you're doing? Do you get to say in what? Do you feel you got some autonomy? And then you're proud of how. You feel that you're doing good work in a good way. And then take away any negative factors that detract from that. So if you've got a 3-hour each way commute, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be happy even if all of this stuff is great. But if those negative factors aren't kind of overwhelming the positive things about your role, then you're going to enjoy it. And these questions, many of them fit into that framework very easily. Right? So does the mission or purpose of my company make me feel like my work is important? Do I know what's expected of me at work? Do my opinions seem to count? And I find it really fascinating how many of these are about mastery, how many of them are about, can I feel proud of how I'm working? The research in the book was written in the late 90s, and some of the wording kind of indicates that. So do I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right? I think in the modern world, we'd also add data and information to that, or people and colleagues and skills. I love this question of, do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day? It's a really useful career coaching question for people as well. Like, do you feel like you get to do what you're best at every single day in your role? Is a really interesting way to decide whether you keep on the path that you're on. Someone care about my development? Are my coworkers committed to doing quality work? In this last 6 months, have I talked with someone about my development, and have I had opportunities to learn and grow? But then there's some stuff that doesn't fit into that framework. In the last 7 days, have I received recognition or praise for good work? Does my supervisor, see that 90s thing, or someone at work seem to care about me as a person? Are they not expecting me to be somebody else at work than who I really am? And I love how culture, I love what this last question reveals about culture. So in America, apparently it's fine to say, do I have a best friend at work? The Northern European reaction to that tends to be, the company doesn't get to choose who I select my one true best friend from. So for those of you who, unlike me, are from a Northern European culture, interpret that last question as if it were written, is there someone at work who, even if the company weren't paying, I might choose to spend some non-work time with, maybe even not talking about work? Yeah? Yeah? It's not quite as snappy, I'll give you that, but, right. And so this is, my friend Camille Fournier, who was CTO on the Runway, talks about this as community. I talk about it as inclusion. I think it's about whether you feel respected and rewarded, and whether you feel like you can be yourself and be successful. And so, when my clicker works, and so we need to think about all of those different factors. But I think this question about, do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day, is a really fascinating one. So we have the tech industry in particular, which I'm probably most obsessed about, has this terrible history of taking 1920s style factory management and going, we'll figure it out from there. And ignoring that there's 100 years of science and people investigating this stuff and proper research studies and just not learning any of the lessons from that. And we've spent a lot of time as a result focusing on what people aren't good at and trying to level them out. So we take someone who's good at 3 things and bad at 1, and we spend all of the year trying to make them go from bad to mediocre at that one thing that they're not great at, rather than getting the most out of what they're great at. And I think, I describe that as leveling people out to consistent mediocrity, which I don't think should be in anybody's career goal. I'd like to be consistently mediocre, it's not. I mean, if that's your career goal, see me afterwards. We can have a chat. And so we need to get the most out of difference. We're not interchangeable resource units. And if you call people resources, they're allowed to call you overhead. Please don't call people resources, they're people. But think of people as colors or flavors. We're better when we are in complement or in concert with each other. The Avengers aren't cool because they can all Hulk smash. They're cool because they can do different things. And if we think of people and roles as a matter of casting, then how do we assemble a great team with those complementary abilities rather than trying to make everybody smoothed out and exactly the same and interchangeable? If you haven't seen the new Ghostbusters movie, You need to. And so my base thesis here is part of our role, whether we're line managing people or project managing a team or just helping stuff come into existence somehow, we're being a change in the world, which is effectively what project management is. It's taking something from one state to another and hopefully that being a positive thing, right? Is we create space in which that can happen. We get a lot more done by creating an environment for great work than we do by trying to just tell everybody what to do and how to do it. And this is the most hippie slide of the deck, I promise. But I suppose I have an underlying philosophy that every role is capable of virtuosity. Very few people get up in the morning and go, today I am aiming for just south of mediocre, and if I can mess everybody else up along the way, then my day will be perfect, right? Like, sociopaths exist, find them, and either exit them or run from them. But on the whole, people get up in the morning and don't want to be terrible at their job. People get up in the morning and want to be good at what they're doing. And so if you look at everybody who might be underperforming and go, are they just miscast? They're in the wrong role. They're in a role that doesn't get the most out of what they're good at. Or something else is wrong here, like the situation is causing poor performance is the thing I've most often found. And I've managed probably a few thousand individuals now over the last 15 years in various size teams. And almost never poor performance is just down to somebody wanting to be bad at what they do, except for the occasional sociopath. And so Space to be Awesome is about these four things together. Do I believe in why? Do I get a say in what? Am I proud of how? Do I belong here? Purpose, autonomy, mastery, and inclusion. And then not giving somebody a 4-hour each-way commute. And I think our role, whether we're the manager or the leader or even an individual contributor, is to create that space in which everybody can be the best they can be. And so ask yourself whether your team, your people know why we're doing what we're doing. Do people get a say in the what? Are we doing the right thing? And do they get opportunities to do the thing right? And I'm sure you've all had very spirited discussions with engineers worried about quality or designers worried about whether it's beautiful enough or useful enough. And recognizing that that's not them getting in the way of your deadline, it's them wanting to feel that sense of mastery. But finding a way through that makes sense. And then do we make a bunch of different kinds of people feel like they like they belong, that they can be themselves and be successful? And so those 12 questions kind of rebucketed into those areas are a really interesting recipe for how you create high-performing teams, how you get the most out of a set of individuals trying to achieve something together. The theory's great, but what does it mean when we take it and try to figure out what to do day to day and week to week? Step one and job one of any leader is to be an amazing translator. You probably have more context than at least some of the people in the team, if not all of the people in your team. And so protect purpose. Be a translator for them of making the strategy and the direction make sense. Help people understand why this milestone or deadline is important, what it means to the client, why the user is going to benefit if we build this feature. And connect what people are doing right now, but also what they can do in future to that overall important purpose. One thing I found absolutely fascinating with every new person I get to manage in the last decade or so is how it's very different levels that people care about purpose. So I've worked with people who, unless they genuinely feel like they are saving the world or saving lives in some way, they're not happy. And they're the folks who are never going to leave that career in the charity sector. Or my wife is an architect and she designs hospitals. She's like literally saving lives. And she'll take poor conditions and poor pay to keep doing something that she thinks is genuinely important in that way, because her connection to purpose is at this very high level. And then I've worked with a lot of people who literally, if you can just make what they're doing today make sense in the context of what the team is doing this week, then you are the best manager they've ever encountered. And so you don't need to convince everybody that they're saving the world. You just need to understand how people are wired, what matters to them, and then help translate what they're doing in that way. And remember that quite often you know more. You've got more context. You're exposed to more information than some of the folks in the team. And you don't need them to be bombarded with all that same information as you. But you can summarize. You can help give context and add information that helps them believe that there's an actual reason to do this stuff. For autonomy and mastery, like you can do a eye-wateringly expensive situational leadership course, or I can just teach you about the clue skills matrix, which is this. Who's done situational leadership? It's the 3 hardest days of my life, man. Like, it's literally just this matrix, but they need to make it take 3 days in order for it to cost that much. It is dark days, man, dark days. So the first caveat to this is people as a whole are not in one of these boxes on a grid. People are on a box in this grid for a specific task. And what a lot of new managers, facilitators, leaders do is they only have 2 modes. They only have dealing with people who don't know what to do or how to do it, or people who know what to do and how to do it. And that's the junior manager phenomenon of being a micromanager or invisible and absent, right? And the reality is, most of the time, people have some idea of what to do, but they lack some knowledge and skills, or they have all the knowledge and skills they might need, they just don't know what the right direction to take is. And so our role is different depending on where somebody is in one of these for a particular piece of work. If someone genuinely knows what to do and how to do it, you can go into bulldozer and cheerleader mode. You clear the way for them, you unblock them, you get stuff out of their way, and you tell them they're awesome, and you tell other people they're awesome, because they just need a path clearing. When folks are in genuine, I don't know what to do or how to do it, they need teaching. They often don't need teaching or directing by you. Somebody who's a little closer to them in experience, somebody who's 6 months ahead of a really junior developer or designer is probably a lot more use in helping direct their work day to day than someone who's much more experienced. And then if somebody lacks skills or knowledge, you find a way for them to get that skill or knowledge. And if somebody lacks direction, that's the appropriate moment to use coaching. Has anybody read Outliers or Talent is Overrated? A couple of you? So like Outliers is the very pop-sci version. Talent is Overrated is frankly a bit drier, but a more comprehensive review of the literature. And I like science, as I mentioned earlier. And so when people are developing new skills, some of the science in this area is really interesting. I particularly love science where scientists believe something is true and set out to prove how it is true and then find that they were wrong, which is the story of this. So they believed that musical talent, innate talent for music was a thing. They went to the premier violin school in the world to try and identify at a really early age which children had the most musical talent and therefore should be invested in and therefore would become world-class orchestra players or whatever in future. And they went to, and I'm not a classical musician, I'm wearing like flying unicorns on my shirt. I'm clearly not posh enough for classical music. But they went and asked this violin school, like, who are your future world-class soloists? Who are your folks who will probably play an amazing orchestra, but they're not going to be a world-class soloist? And who are your future music teachers? I'm not being mean to music teachers. They had a specific program to make sure that there were good music teachers in the world so that future world-class soloists would exist. And they went and interviewed their parents, and they went and interviewed all the lecturers, and they went and made them diarize their lives for months at a time to figure out why there was this distinction. And this is where the 10,000-hour rule stuff comes from. So they realized that the folks who arrived at this music college and were easily identifiable as the future world-class soloists already had 7,000 or more hours of individual practice. An individual practice with a violin, I'm told, is the least exciting part. Playing with the orchestra is awesome. Playing with your friends is awesome. Sitting in a room alone trying to learn the music is less awesome, apparently. And so it was the folks who'd put in possibly the most drudgy work, the most drudgy work by the time they arrived, who were most likely to be world-class. And then similar step down for the 5,000 hours for the next tier and 3,000 hours for the bottom tier. And for something like this, if you want to be world-class by the time you're 20, that's a lot. Like, if you think how many days that is and how many years you've got to do it in, that's a lot of time. And that's for world-class. There's been quite a lot of people trying to rebut this 10,000-hour rule science. It's all very worthy work. It's very interesting to look at. Most of it is actually about the distinction between world-class and not. You can learn a new skill much faster than that. You can't get world-class at a new skill without putting serious hours in. The other example in Talent's Overrated, which I love, is the ice hockey example. So a couple were watching ice hockey, I assume in Canada, where I'm South African, rugby's our religion, seems like the equivalent in Canada's ice hockey. And a woman remarked to her husband that it was strange that they were all born at the same time. And he went, no, they're not listening. And said, this one's 26 and this one's the kind of 17-year-old wunderkind. And she went, no, they're all born in January or February. It's really strange. And he went and investigated and did some follow-up research on it. And it's true. And they worked out eventually that the reason it's true, if you want your kid to play national level hockey in Canada, they should be born in January or February because the school year cuts off in December. And so when you start at 4 or 5 years old, there's a big difference at 4 or 5 years old between 4 years old just and 4 years, 11 months old, both in terms of bulk and reflexes and coordination. Like 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds are a pretty big step in terms of how much they fall over themselves, right? And so that initial advantage someone had of being 11 months older translated over time into being more likely to be in the team that got to play every week, having more practices, having more matches, and then over the course of their childhood, having a huge amount more actual practice. And ice hockey is the kind of sport where you need a lot of equipment, right? You need a rink, you need all of this protection gear. It would appear it's hard to learn the skills unless you have people to beat up. It's not a, it's the counterexample to this is there's no age correlation. There's a height correlation, but no age correlation with basketball, because you can get great at basketball with just a ball. It's great if you have a hoop, but you don't even need a hoop. There are kids who get good enough to be selected for a basketball team, having had very little access to formal facilities at all, because it's a sport where you can develop your skills just with putting the work in on your own. And so what all this teaches us is we're good at what we practice, provided we can learn from it. And there's this fairly academic definition of deliberate practice, which is quite interesting. So you need to be motivated to attend to the task. So you want to put the effort in. You're trying to improve your performance. It's something you care about. It takes into account what you already know. You receive immediate informative feedback, and you repeatedly perform the same or similar tasks. And a lot of how we're taught when we're kids at school maps with this. A lot of stuff is designed to be this kind of immediate feedback loop, and it should be challenging enough to be interesting, but not so challenging to be frustrating, repetitive enough to learn from, but not so repetitive as to be boring. It's also how video games work. The game that's too repetitive bores you. The game that's too difficult, you bail on because you get frustrated. And so it's that midpoint of being enough repetition to learn from, but enough challenge to keep you interested, and it's something that you want to do. And there's different models of this. So the sports model is you get good at the underlying capabilities. So rugby players do sprints and lift weights, and they do all these other things which aren't what you do on the pitch necessarily, but they help you be better on the pitch in the match. The chess model is looking at somebody else's match and going, well, what would I do in this moment? And then looking at what the actual grandmaster did, so modeling yourself on someone else. And we do that with people in the workplace sometimes. We're like, go watch this person run a meeting and learn from them. And then the music model is kind of breaking stuff up into smaller parts that you then string together. We don't really design work that way. We go from a childhood where things are designed as a learning experience and practice, and then performing in a test or a presentation or whatever else, into the world of work where every day is performance time. Every day is being on stage, giving the talk, not practicing it. And so think about, for yourself and for your team, if there's a way that you could design work to be more effective as a learning experience. Because if people aren't learning, they're falling behind. So can we design our work to be that right mix of challenging with immediate feedback, with the learning loop happening, and help people do stuff more than once? That repetition really matters. It's quite important. And when you look back on people who've had very vertical careers or they've done very well, when you ask them, how did you learn to be great at this thing that you're clearly great at? Even if they've had lots of different job titles, they've often had a thread of experiences that were similar enough that they kept getting better and better and better at that skill. And then finally, we need to cultivate inclusion. And there's this amazing statistic about how whether you can attract, recruit, retain diverse range of people is really about whether a diverse range of people can agree with this statement of someone like me can be successful here. And the wording of that's quite important. It's not, can you succeed here? Because that activates your fight or flight. It's, can someone like me be successful here? Do I have any evidence that people like me do well here? Do I have any evidence that people who aren't all just exactly like what's senior here do well here? And it's not a gift, so it doesn't count, right? I feel very strongly about this. But that's because I'm literally the one the Daily Mail warned you about. Like, I worked for the Government Digital Service. I worked for the Cabinet Office for a while. I built the team that built gov.uk. And HR there literally asked me to not wear this T-shirt. They were so worried I was going to get photographed by the Daily Mail exiting a government building wearing this T-shirt. I own it. I'm not allowed to wear it. But I'm a statistic, right? I'm a woman who works in tech. I'm gay. I'm foreign. I'm an immigrant who's employed, which I think is worse than if I were unemployed and living off the state, but I have to check the headlines very regularly to be sure. And I have a disability, and I'm godless, and my wife is British, so I'm over here stealing your women and your jobs. She loves that joke. She doesn't love that joke. She's gotten used to that joke, would be the more appropriate. But I grew up white in apartheid. I grew up where the accident of my skin color meant I would get to go to university. It was a problem that I was a woman, but I had the option of going to university. I had the option of staying in school beyond the age of 16, which wouldn't have been true if I were not white. I had the option of being taught more than just how to learn to read, write, and add up basic numbers. Because there was a whole sector of society when I was growing up during apartheid that were only educated to the age of 13, because why would they ever need to do more than obey instructions and do simple math? And that was the childhood I had. That was the setting I was in when I was growing up. And so when people tell me they feel under attack when people talk about privilege, like, I know exactly what it's like to have unasked, undeserved privilege. It's, even when you're benefiting from it and knowing how terrible it is, you're still benefiting from it even if you disagree with it. And so my childhood was full of these signs that said toilets were whites only, beaches. So this is a sign on a beach that we used to go to when I was a kid that said net blancas, whites only. 15% of the population took 85% of the land. 15% of the population took 100% of the leadership positions in every company, every government organization. And it was awful. And I used to not give any talks about diversity or any of this stuff for a lot of years because I get so upset by it still. But I was still benefiting from it. And I can't deny that. And I think one of our responsibilities is to realize what privilege we have. I had privilege of electricity and warmth growing up. There were kids in my class who their grades were worse in the wintertime because they lived in a cardboard shack and their family couldn't afford enough candles for them to do their maths homework. And nobody who was switching on the light at night to do their maths homework was thinking, oh, I'm so privileged to have this electricity. But we were. And so I think the most useful thing we can all do is assess and understand and acknowledge that privilege and then try to share it out better. Anwan Simmons did an amazing talk at Lead Dev in New York, which is another White October event, and I'd strongly recommend you all go and watch it. It's called Lending Privilege, about how you can lend whatever privilege you have to others and specific techniques for doing that. I'm sure that the ground control team can tweet out the link to it. And so there's lots of ways to kind of inventory this. Peggy McIntosh's white privilege checklist is a really interesting thing to read. There's a gender version of it. There's a whole bunch of different things like this. If you do one bit of homework for me today, please go look at this and share it with someone who you think needs to understand it. I'll tweet out the slides as well for anybody who just missed taking a photo. And remember that not discriminating is important, like legally, if nothing else, right? Particularly in the UK, we have a pretty strong set of legislation around this now. But tolerance is a terrible word. Do you want to be tolerated? My little brother kind of hates me, but he tolerates me because we're related. Like, I don't aspire to be being put up with at work. And I think that's what tolerance means. Tolerance means I still don't like who you are or what you are, but I'm gonna pretend that I can put up with you. And so let's focus instead on fully inclusive environments. How do we make an environment really embrace all the different kinds of people and all their different capabilities? Diversity is a spectrum. We've got, if we've got active hatred and, sexism, homophobia, all of those isms down the one end, active inclusion at the other, indifference and tolerance are somewhere in the middle, but most of us are still just experiencing an awful lot of active stuff and microaggressions right now. Does everybody know what a microaggression is? Not really. Okay, so a microaggression is telling young boys that they're very smart and young girls that they're very pretty. It's reinforcing something about what you think is important about someone else. My personal favorite microaggression is when people find out I'm foreign, they tell me how good my English is. I speak 5 languages, but English is my first language. It's the one I've been speaking since I was born. Not like actually since birth. I'm not like a prodigy or anything, but like it's the first language I spoke is the point I'm trying to make. And so you find that a lot. Asking people of color, where are you from? And then when the answer is like Cardiff, going, where are your parents from? Cardiff. And there's an amazing interview with Shirley Bassey where her answer all the way back to like great-great-grandparents was Cardiff. It's worth finding on YouTube. Shirley Bassey is badass. And one way you can lend privilege is to keep aware of when that is happening to people around you. Where are your people from is an insidious, racist question. And if you're letting that happen in your environment, then you're not helping to stop it. You're complicit with it. And so, this is the depressing bit over, I promise. It gets a little better from here. So how do we move the right way? We stop pushing people away and we start including them more actively. And there's 3 main things to think about when you do this. So when somebody's considering whether to join your team or stay in your team, join your organization or stay in your organization, when they're deciding whether to take that promotion, some people are having genuine conversations with themselves about whether they want to be promoted here. Then think about these 3 questions, because whether they're asking it actively or not, they're asking these questions. They're trying to figure out if they're expected here. When I look at a new company that I'm considering working for, the way they phrase their parental leave policy really matters to me. I know that sounds like a weird thing to look for, but paternity and maternity policies don't tend to apply to families like mine. When somebody talks about it as parental leave, I'm much more likely to believe that they get it. People who have codes of conduct that talk about gender identity as well as all the other legally mandated classes that have to be respected, I'm more likely to think that they're woke. And, that's all on your front door. The companies who call me up and are like, we have a recruitment problem, can you come help us? And I go, cool, right, let's look at your funnel. Who's applying? Nobody any different from what you have here today is applying. You've got a front door problem. You've got something on your website, something about your company image, your organizational images, telling people that they're not expected there. So they're not even going to apply. It's not that you're not putting them through to interview, it's that they never even show up. And then second, at the point that they have applied or they're in an interview process, do they feel respected as they go through it? Not from the company side, but from the candidate side. This week, my engineering director, who happens to be a woman, and one of the engineering managers, who happens to be a man, who works for her, interviewed a candidate who the candidate assumed when they entered the room that she must be the more junior of the two. And then repeatedly during the interview went, well, you'll be less technical, so you won't understand this, and explain something to the guy. And the engineering manager, is very aware that his boss is a lot more technical than him. And so he didn't even know what to do in this situation. He's just like, wow, this is terrible. And it's not often that happens from the candidate side, right? It's usually from the company side. The number of women I know who are engineers who people go, oh, are you here for a design interview? There's nothing wrong with being a designer, but assuming that all women are designers rather than engineers is a little bit sexist. When people make those assumptions and kind of reinforce them, it's very problematic for someone to feel like they're going to be respected when they actually join. And then this final question, can I be myself and be successful here? Am I going to have to pretend to be something I'm not every day? And it's sometimes really hard to find someone who's a role model in your particular organization, right? You look up and you go, who is there that is like me? I'll be honest, I don't find a lot of queer, disabled, godless immigrants to look up to in the companies I work in. But I don't need to find all of that. I don't need to find the full checklist in order to feel inspired by the leadership of my organization. But I probably do need to find that they're not all exactly like each other. And so even just some diversity of background and demographic and similar in the leadership of an organization can be signs that there's different routes to success, that different kinds of people can succeed over time. And also, don't forget to spread the small stuff. But really, focus on these 4 areas. Do people feel that they understand the purpose? Do they believe in why? Do they get a say in what? Do they believe that they have autonomy? Are they proud of how? They've got mastery. They feel like they're becoming better in their specialism. They're building things they are proud of. They're doing work that they are happy about having done, that they can feel proud of having done. And then do they feel like they belong, that they can be themselves and be successful? Every role is capable of virtuosity. You can be good at anything, and people can be excited to be good at anything. There's a great study Disney did into who their best cleaners were in their hotel. And they found that the very best cleaners that they had were the ones who had such empathy for the guests who were going to arrive after a long journey and flop down on the bed in the Florida heat to finally relax. They were the only ones who cleaned the ceiling fans, because they realized that if you flop down on the bed and the fan is on and dust and grit lands on your face, it's not a great experience, right? That's why empathy is a superpower. And even jobs that you think are uninteresting, somebody else might enjoy being brilliant at. People don't get up in the morning wanting to be terrible at their jobs. So help create space in which everybody feels they can be their best. Make space to be awesome. Thank you very much.